Listen close, because tonight I've got a love story that still aches in my chest every time I remember it. A love so powerful it defied soldiers, society, and every rule the world tried to enforce. This took place in the wild, wind-scoured heart of 1872 New Mexico, where canyons hide secrets and snow falls like a curtain between two impossible destinies. It all started with one stolen moment. A pair of eyes meeting through a carriage window in a blizzard. A glance so electric it stopped time and rewrote both their futures. If that kind of once-in-a-lifetime pull speaks to you, hit like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. Where are you joining us from tonight? The winter of 1872 swept into the New Mexico territory like a vengeful ghost, fiercer than anything the old-timers could recall. Snow poured down in thick, unyielding curtains, turning the rusty red earth into pale, silent tombstones. The wind screamed through the canyons like the wail of long-dead ancestors, and the cold sank its fangs straight through the heaviest wool coats. Sable Reed pressed her gloved palm to the iced-over window of the stagecoach, watching her own breath bloom and fade in ghostly swirls on the glass. Beyond the pane stretched a raw, breathtaking wilderness, miles of unbroken white pierced only by the dark, bowed shapes of pinyon pines sagging under their heavy loads. Nothing like the tame winters back in Philadelphia, with their polished sleigh rides across groomed parks and cozy parlors buzzing with the gossip of high society ladies. "Miss Reed, step back from that window this instant," her chaperone Maud Sterling snapped from the opposite bench. The older woman's face was drawn tight, equal parts frostbite and moral outrage. "We're riding straight through hostile country. Those savages could be lurking anywhere." Sable fought the urge to roll her eyes. She'd heard it all before. Maud Sterling had spent the entire 3 weeks since St. Louis preaching the gospel of frontier peril. According to her, everything west of the Mississippi existed for one purpose: to ruin decent young women, rough miners, wild cowboys, the merciless land itself, but above all, the Apache. "Demons wearing human skin," she'd hissed more than once, clutching her worn Bible. "Heathens with no grasp of decency or the mercy of Christ. If they catch us," she'd whisper, voice dropping low, "pray they grant us a swift end rather than—" And there she'd stop, leaving the unspeakable to fill Sable's mind like smoke. Sable wasn't sure what to make of it all. Her father, Rufus Reed, had carved his empire out of steel rails and smokestacks back east. But lately his money had flowed into the sprawling cattle spreads and silver mines of the Southwest. He'd sent her out here for 2 reasons. First, to keep an eye on the ranch he'd just bought near Santa Fe, and second, to meet the man he'd chosen for her husband. Gideon Vale was every father's dream. 35, steady as granite, Yale-educated, born into old Boston money, now building his own fortune as a lawyer and land speculator in Santa Fe. According to Rufus's letters, Gideon had been smitten the moment he saw her photograph. They'd never laid eyes on each other. Such matches were ordinary among families like theirs, a calculated alliance to tighten their grip on this fast-growing territory. Gideon would get access to Rufus's deep pockets and eastern connections. Sable would get the safety and standing of a proper marriage to a gentleman of quality. It should have been perfect. Yet as the coach swayed through the frozen wastes, an empty ache settled deep in her chest. At 23, she'd already turned down 3 perfectly suitable suitors back in Philadelphia, driving her mother half mad. Each one had brought the right flowers, recited the right verses, and left her yawning within the hour. One night, after another dull dinner party, she'd stood alone on the family terrace, staring out over the gas-lit city, and whispered to the dark, "Is this really all there is?" Her younger sister Elowen had laughed when Sable finally confessed her restlessness. "You've got your head full of dime novels, that's what. You're waiting for some gallant rider to sweep you away on his white charger. But this is real life, Sable. Real life means duty, family, and smart decisions. Sable knew Eloan spoke the truth. She'd told herself the same thing 1,000 times. Still, buried in a quiet corner of her heart, she rarely dared to visit. A stubborn spark refused to die. She wanted more. Something raw, something alive, something that would set her blood on fire. She just never dreamed she'd find it in the middle of a snow-choked New Mexico pass. The coach lurched hard. Sable grabbed the seat to keep from tumbling. Outside, she heard the driver, Calder Shaw, shouting to the team in a voice edged with panic. The two hired guards, Slate and Crow, riding escort from Santa Fe, were yelling something she couldn't catch over the wind. Maud Sterling's face drained of color. "What's happening?" Sable pressed her face closer to the glass. At first, nothing but swirling white. Then shapes appeared. Dark, silent figures rising like smoke from the pine thickets on both sides of the narrow trail. Riders. They materialized with eerie quiet, 12 strong, mounted on sure-footed ponies that moved through the deep drifts as easily as goats on sheer rock. The warriors wore heavy buffalo robes over buckskin, their long black hair tied back with rawhide strips and crowned with feathers. Some cradled rifles, others carried bows across their backs. But what struck Sable deepest was their stillness. No wild yells, no frantic gestures. They simply sat their horses, calm and unyielding as the mountains themselves. The coach jolted to a stop. "Don't move," one of the guards hissed through clenched teeth. "Don't even breathe too loud." Maud Sterling's lips moved in frantic prayer, fingers flying over her rosary beads. Merciful Lord, shield us from the devil's own." But Sable couldn't tear her eyes from the window. The riders had begun to circle the coach now, their ponies' hooves carving deep furrows in the fresh powder. They moved like men who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, precise, wordless, absolute command without a trace of chaos. And then she saw him. He rode a pace ahead of the others on a striking paint stallion whose coat gleamed against the snow like living flame. Taller than the rest, broad-shouldered beneath a thick buffalo robe, his face was all hard planes and sharp angles, high cheekbones, strong jaw, mouth set in a line that spoke of rare smiles. His raven-black hair fell past his shoulders, 2 eagle feathers braided into a thin lock at his temple. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Even through the falling snow and the frost-laced glass, she felt the weight of his gaze lock onto the coach, onto her. Not angry, not curious in any ordinary way. Searching. Knowing. Without thinking, Sable lifted her hand and pressed it flat against the cold pane, reaching toward him across the impossible distance. His dark eyes flicked to the movement. For one endless heartbeat, something shifted across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, or the faintest spark of wonder. The hard line of his mouth eased, just enough to notice. They held each other's stare through the storm, through the glass, through the chasm of 2 worlds that should never have touched. Sable's heart slammed against her ribs. Every story she'd ever heard, every warning Maud Sterling had drilled into her, every lurid headline about frontier massacres should have had her trembling in terror. But she wasn't afraid. Instead, something ancient and untamed woke inside her chest, a pull as fierce and inevitable as the pull of the moon on the tide. As if some hidden part of her soul had been waiting her whole life for this exact moment, this exact man. Time stretched thin. The wind fell silent. The cold retreated. There was only the 2 of them, suspended in that frozen instant of impossible connection. Then one of the older warriors, gray threading his braids, spoke a low question in their tongue. The man on the paint horse didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on Sable's window, unreadable and steady. At last he raised one hand, not in threat, but in quiet acknowledgement. He murmured a few words to his men. Instantly, they drew their ponies back, reforming along the roadside in perfect order. The way was clear. Caldershaw didn't wait for a second signal. He cracked the whip, and the team lunged forward, hooves churning through the drifts. Slate and Crow kept their hands near their weapons, but never drew. In moments, the coach was rolling again, leaving the silent riders swallowed by the swirling white. Maud Sterling let out a shuddering gasp. Merciful heavens, we could have been butchered, scalped, worse. Oh, Miss Reed, we must thank the Lord for our deliverance. But Sable wasn't listening. She twisted in her seat, pressing her face to the rear window. Through the thickening snow, she could still make out the tall figure on the paint horse. He hadn't moved. He stood motionless, a dark silhouette against the endless white, watching until the road curved and hid him from sight. Something inside her had shifted forever in those few stolen seconds. A door she never knew existed had been flung wide, letting in a wild, blinding light. She didn't know his name. She knew nothing about him except the fire in his eyes and the unshakable certainty that burned through her now. But she knew, with a truth deeper than reason, that she would carry the memory of him to her grave. And somehow, against all sense, she felt the same unshakable certainty staring back. He would never forget her either. He sat a half-stride in front of his men, astride a stunning paint stallion whose coat shimmered like polished stone against the blinding snow. Taller than the rest, his shoulders carried the solid breadth of a man who'd wrestled mountains and won. A thick buffalo robe draped over him, framing a face carved from hard stone. High, proud cheekbones, a jaw like forged iron, and a mouth set in a line that looked like it had forgotten how to curve into anything soft. His hair spilled long and black as midnight over his shoulders, 2 eagle feathers tied into a single braid near his temple. But it was his eyes that hit Sable like a rifle shot to the chest. Even from across the swirling white, even through the frost-crusted glass, the force of his stare pinned her in place. He looked straight at the coach, straight at her window, with an expression that wasn't anger and wasn't kindness. It was deeper, hungrier, like he was searching for something he'd lost long ago. Without a single thought, Sable raised her hand from the seat and flattened it against the cold pane, reaching across the impossible space between them. His gaze snapped to the motion. In that single heartbeat, something raw flashed across his features. Shock, maybe, or the spark of recognition, or pure, unguarded wonder. The rigid line of his mouth eased, just enough to notice, like the first crack in winter ice. They held each other's eyes through the storm, through the glass, through every rule and boundary that separated their worlds. Sable's heart pounded so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. She ought to be shaking with terror. Every whispered tale of Apache raids, every grim sermon Maud Sterling had delivered, every blood-soaked newspaper story about the frontier should have sent her shrinking into the shadows. But fear never came. Instead, a wild, unstoppable current surged through her veins, fierce as gravity, relentless as the pull of the moon on the sea. It felt like a part of her soul she'd never known existed had snapped awake, locking onto something vital and familiar in this stranger's dark gaze. Time froze. The wind died. The cold vanished. Nothing existed except the two of them, caught in a single shattering instant of connection that should never have happened. Then an older warrior, silver streaking his braids, murmured something low in their tongue, the words rising like a question on the wind. The man on the paint horse didn't answer at once. He kept staring at Sable's window, eyes dark and fathomless. Finally, he lifted one hand, not in menace, but in quiet salute. With the barest shift of his knees, he turned the stallion and spoke a handful of clipped words to his men. They moved as one, drawing their ponies back and falling into line along the roadside. The path was open. Caldershaw didn't hesitate. He slapped the reins hard, and the team surged forward, hooves churning through the drifts. Slate and Crow kept their hands close to their guns, but never drew iron. In seconds, the coach was rolling again, the silent riders fading into the white whirl behind them. Sable spun in her seat, pressing her cheek to the rear window. Through the thickening flakes, she could still see him. The tall figure on the paint horse, unmoving, a lone shadow against the endless snow. He watched until the bend in the trail stole him away. "Lord have mercy," Maud Sterling wheezed, sweat beading on her forehead despite the biting cold. "We could have been slaughtered, scalped, Lord knows what else. Oh, Miss Reed, we've got to thank the Almighty for sparing us." But Sable heard none of it. She turned back to the front, her hand still flat against the glass where she'd reached for him. Her palm had melted a perfect outline in the frost, a fragile mark already dissolving in the chill. Everything had changed. In those few stolen seconds of locked gazes, something deep inside her had cracked wide open, flooding her with a light she'd never known existed. She didn't know his name. She knew nothing except the raw power in his stance, the quiet command that charged the air around him like summer lightning. Yet she knew, with a bone-deep certainty that laughed at reason, she would carry him in her heart until her dying day. And somehow, impossibly, she felt the same fierce certainty burning back at her. He would never let her memory fade either. The ranch her father had bought, the Double L, named for the Reed family, lay in a broad valley 20 miles outside Santa Fe. It was a big outfit, thousands of longhorns grazing the hills, strings of good saddle horses, and a sprawling adobe hacienda raised by Spanish hands generations back. Jericho Flint, the grizzled Texan who ran the place, met them at the gate. "Welcome to New Mexico, Miss Reed," he said, tipping his hat with a calloused hand. His eyes were steady and kind beneath the rough edges. "Your pa wired ahead. Rooms are ready, and Mr. Vale'll be riding out tomorrow afternoon to pay his call." Sable murmured thanks, but her thoughts were still up in the high passes, replaying that frozen moment again and again, like a song she couldn't shake. She hardly registered the hacienda's quiet grandeur, the heavy vigas overhead, the thick wool rugs underfoot, the massive stone hearth that warmed the main room like a heartbeat. That night, stretched out in a bed softer than anything she'd known since leaving St. Louis. Sable stared up at the shadowed beams and thought only of the Apache warrior. Who was he? What had run through his mind when their eyes met? And why did it feel like something unbreakable had been forged in that single, breathless glance? She told herself she was being a fool. She told herself it was foolishness. Just a fleeting brush on a treacherous trail. Nothing more than nodding to a stranger on a crowded Philadelphia avenue. She'd never cross paths with him again. She'd wed Gideon Vale, settle into the steady role of a rancher's wife, and push the memory of the man with eagle feathers braided in his hair to the back of her mind. Yet even as the words formed in her thoughts, she knew they rang hollow. Some wild, untamed corner of her soul, one untouched by logic, duty, or the rigid rules of her old world, had recognized him instantly. And that recognition had kindled a flame inside her chest, one she suspected no amount of time or reason could ever snuff out. Beyond her window, snow kept drifting down over the New Mexico peaks, blanketing the world in hushed white. And somewhere out in that vast, frozen silence, she felt certain the Apache warrior was thinking of her too. Thorn stood at the canyon's rim, gazing down across the snow-draped valley. The wind tugged at his long hair and the heavy buffalo robe across his shoulders, but the bite of the cold barely registered. His thoughts were miles away, snared in a single instant on a high mountain road, trapped by a pair of eyes the clear blue of high summer sky. He'd known white women before. A handful over the years, quick nights shared under blankets that eased the body but never touched the spirit. The women of his own people were strong, beautiful, deserving of honor and longing. He'd never wanted for company when the need arose. But the woman in that coach, she was something else entirely. Thorn couldn't put words to it, not even in the quiet of his own mind. It wasn't only her looks, though she was striking. Hair like sunlight caught in honey, skin pale as first light, eyes that met his without a flicker of fear or loathing. It was deeper. The way she'd lifted her hand to the glass, reaching across the chasm that divided their lives, as if it were nothing. The way their gazes had locked and held, making the world fall away until time itself seemed to pause. "You carry a heavy look, brother." Thorn turned. Riven stepped through the drifts toward him, his second, his friend since boyhood, the one man who could read his silences like tracks in fresh snow. Concern etched the older warrior's weathered face. "I'm thinking," Thorn said plainly, "about the woman in the carriage." Riven didn't press. He simply nodded. "I saw you looking, and I saw her looking back." That was all it took. They stood together in quiet, watching the sun slide toward the jagged western ridges. The sky burned orange and gold, setting the snowfields ablaze. "What will you do?" Riven asked at last. "I don't know." The admission came hard. As leader of his band, Thorn was expected to walk every path with certainty, to see the trail clear before his people. Doubt was a stranger to him, until now. "You could let her go," Riven offered gently. "She belongs to their world. We belong to this one. The distance between is wider than any canyon." Thorn knew his friend spoke truth. The divide wasn't just miles. It was language, ways of living, generations of blood spilled between their peoples. She was white, clearly born to wealth, judging by the fine coach and clothes. She likely lived in one of the growing towns, surrounded by folks who branded his kind as savages and devils. She might already be promised to some white man who could offer her the safe, soft life her people prized. The thought sent a sharp twist through his chest. "I've known white women before," Thorn said low. "But her, when our eyes met, I felt something I've never known, like my spirit recognized hers, even without a single word spoken." Riven stayed silent a long beat. Then he spoke softly. "My grandfather used to say some souls are born as twins, torn apart before they draw breath and scattered across the earth. Most never find each other again. But when they do, nothing can hold them apart. Not distance, not time, not even death." "Do you believe it?" Thorn asked, his voice rough. In his mind he saw again the pale hand pressed to the window, the answering light in her blue eyes. Had she felt it too? That pull, that knowing? Or had he dreamed the fire there? "I need to know where she went," Thorn said. The words slipped out before he could cage them, and once free, he knew they were true. "I need to know who she is." Riven nodded slowly. "The coach was bound for Santa Fe. If she stays in the territory, she won't be hard to find. We have friends in many places." It was so. Even as they fought to hold their lands against settlers and soldiers, the Apache weren't cut off. They bartered with Mexican vaqueros, kept old ties with Spanish families who remembered the days before the Americans came, and word traveled far on quiet trails. "Find out what you can," Thorn said, "but keep it quiet. I won't bring trouble to her door." Riven's look was knowing. "You worry for her safety and you don't even know her name." "No," Thorne agreed. "But I will." The next afternoon, Gideon Vale rode up to the Double L, right on time, 2 o'clock sharp, just as his letter had promised. Sable watched from her upstairs window as he swung down from a sleek bay gelding and passed the reins to a waiting hand. He cut a fine figure in the classic sense. Tall, light brown hair clipped neat and close, a trimmed mustache that spoke of city polish, clothes tailored expensive, but never flashy. He carried himself with the easy assurance of a man who'd never once doubted he'd be received well anywhere he stepped foot. Sable felt nothing. Not a spark, not a flutter. She tried hard to muster something, excitement, at least a flicker of hope. This was the man her father had picked for her, the steady provider who'd hand her security, standing, a respected place among Santa Fe's better families. Yet her mind kept drifting back to a pair of dark eyes, watching her from atop a paint horse, the thunder that had rolled through her chest when their gazes locked across the snow. "Miss Reed?" Maud Sterling's knock came sharp against the door. "Mr. Vale is here. Are you presentable?" Sable drew in a steadying breath, smoothed the deep green silk of her best dress, the one she'd packed just for this, and nodded to her reflection. "I'm ready." The hacienda's front parlor had been made ready for company. A lively fire snapped in the big stone hearth. Fresh piñon branches stood in a clay vase, filling the air with their sharp, clean pine scent. A low table held tea and little iced cakes. Gideon Vale rose the moment she entered, his face warming with real delight. "Miss Reed," he said, bending over her hand with old-school courtesy. "Your photograph hardly did you justice. You're far more beautiful in the flesh." "Mr. Vale," Sable answered, curving her lips into the smile she'd practiced so many times back east. "That's very gallant of you. Please, won't you sit?" They eased into the familiar rhythm of polite talk. Questions about her long journey, remarks on the unpredictable weather, gentle probes about her Philadelphia kin, and his own work in the territory. Gideon was smooth, well-read, every inch the gentleman. He spoke with easy confidence about Santa Fe's growth, the land deals ripe for the taking, the pockets of refinement taking root even on the raw edge of civilization. "I know Santa Fe can't hold a candle to Philadelphia," he said with a wry half-smile. "But we're doing our best to keep things civilized out here. There's a literary circle that gathers once a month, and the officers' wives up at Fort Marcy put on regular teas and dances. You'll never want for good company, I promise you that." "That's comforting," Sable replied, aiming for warmth, but hearing the emptiness echo in her own words. If Gideon caught the flat note, he gave no sign. He went on describing the house he was raising, adobe in the old Spanish style, but fitted with every modern touch he could ship in. "I've even got a piano coming all the way from St. Louis," he added proudly. "We'll have music, good meals, a life worth living." It all sounded so tidy, so respectable, so utterly suffocating. "I hope I'm not being too blunt," Gideon said after a quiet pause, his expression shifting to earnest gravity. "But I'd rather lay my cards on the table, Miss Reed. I know this isn't the whirlwind romance the storybooks promise young ladies. Your father's a practical man, I'm a practical man, and this is a practical arrangement. That said, I give you my word. I'll do everything in my power to see you content. I'll be a faithful husband, a steady provider, a father who puts his family first if children come along, and I truly hope, given time, we'll grow to care for one another. Deeply." His honesty cut through the haze. Gideon Vale wasn't spinning tales of grand passion. He was offering the solid bargain men of his station made with women of hers: protection, position, dignity, more than plenty of marriages ever started with. "I appreciate your candor, Mr. Vale," Sable said carefully. and I'm grateful for your thoughtfulness." It wasn't yes, it wasn't no. They both understood that. After Gideon rode off, promising another visit in a few days and extending an invitation to supper at his place, Sable slipped away to her room like a fugitive. She stood at the window, staring toward the distant mountains still capped in white against the fading sky. Somewhere out there rode the Apache warrior. Did he ever think of her the way she thought of him? Or had she been just another passing carriage on his watch? Another safe passage granted, nothing more? "You're acting the fool," she muttered aloud to the empty room. "You know nothing about him, not even his name. You've got duties to your family, to yourself. Gideon Vale is a decent man. You could do a whole lot worse." But even as the words left her lips, she remembered the jolt that had seized her heart when she first saw him on that paint horse. The way the world had stilled when their eyes met. The wild, unshakable certainty. Crazy, impossible, absolute, that something profound had passed between them. For 23 years, she'd played the part. Practical, obedient, the flawless daughter her parents deserved. She'd swallowed the lesson that life was built on responsibility, not reckless longing, on wise choices, not the wild beat of her heart. But what if there was more? What if that brief clash in the snow had cracked open a door to something truer, something alive? What if turning away from it now would be the greatest mistake she'd ever make? Sable leaned her forehead against the cool glass and shut her eyes tight. Beneath every layer of upbringing and expectation, the truth burned clear. She could not marry Gideon Vale. Not anymore. Not after meeting the warrior in the high passes and feeling her soul answer his. She simply had no earthly idea what to do next. 3 days later, Sable lingered in the ranch's wide kitchen, watching Lita shape loaves for supper. The cook was in her 50s, widow of a Mexican vaquero who'd worked the spread before Rufus bought it. She'd stayed on, and her deep knowledge of the land and its people made her worth her weight in silver. "Lita," Sable said, striving for offhand curiosity, "do you know much about the Apache up in these mountains?" Lita's hands paused in the dough. Her dark eyes flicked up, wary yet intrigued. "Why do you ask, señorita?" "We ran into some on the road from Santa Fe," Sable explained. "They let us pass without trouble, but Mrs. Sterling was scared half out of her wits. I was just wondering about them." Lita went back to kneading, but her face turned thoughtful. "The Apache aren't one single people, you understand. Different bands, different leaders. Some fight the soldiers tooth and nail, others try to hold on to what land they've got left and keep the peace where they can." "And the ones in these mountains?" Sable pressed gently. Lita's voice dropped low. "They ride under Thorn. Young for a chief, maybe 30 winters, but his people follow him because he's strong and he's wise. He doesn't go looking for war, but he won't bow and give up their freedom either." Thorn. The name landed in Sable's chest like a spark on dry grass. She repeated it silently, feeling the shape of it on her tongue. Lita's hands kept working the dough as she spoke, her voice low and measured. "They're not all the same, you know. Different bands, different chiefs. Some hit the soldiers and settlers hard, fighting to keep every inch of ground. Others look for ways to live quiet, holding tight to whatever land they've still got left." "And the ones in these mountains?" Sable asked, keeping her tone light even as her pulse kicked up. Lita glanced up, eyes sharp. "They ride with Thorn. Young for a war chief, 30 winters, give or take. But his people trail him because he's got a clear head and a backbone of iron. He doesn't hunt for trouble, but he won't hand over their freedom on a silver platter either." Thorn. The name sliced through Sable like a cold wind off the peaks. She whispered it again in her mind, tasting the hard edge of it on her tongue, the way it burned. A shiver raced down her arms. "Is he dangerous?" she asked quietly. Lita gave a soft, knowing laugh, that carried layers of meaning. Depends who's doing the talking, señorita. To the bluecoats, he's a wild animal that needs caging, or putting down. The Mexican ranchers who barter with him, they call him a man of his word, honorable to the bone. And his own people? Sable pressed. They say the spirits picked him to stand guard in these hard days. Lita paused, studying Sable with eyes that saw too much. Now tell me straight, why the sudden interest? Heat climbed into Sable's cheeks. When they stopped our coach, their leader, Thorn, he looked right at me, and I swear I've never felt anything like it. Like he could see straight through to my heart. She braced for ridicule, for a sharp warning to steer clear of such reckless thoughts. Instead, Lita's face softened, something close to pity flickering there. There's all kinds of seeing in this world, señorita, she said gently, and all kinds of being seen. Sometimes the heart knows things the head can't swallow. She turned back to the bread, but after a beat, she added under her breath, Thorn trades up at San Miguel now and then, 15 miles north, usually Wednesdays, right at first light. Brings deer hides, healing plants, swaps for tobacco, coffee, iron tools. Folks there don't flinch around him. He's never raised a hand against them. Sable's heart slammed against her ribs. Lita had just handed her a map to the forbidden. Thank you, she whispered. Lita didn't look up. I didn't tell you a thing, señorita, and you didn't ask a thing. We're just talking bread and weather, see? Yes, Sable agreed, voice barely above a murmur. Just bread and weather. Wednesday dawned crisp and sharp, the sky a fierce, aching blue that stung the eyes. Sable slipped out before first light, pulling on her plainest riding skirt and jacket, boots laced tight. The ranch lay quiet, only a handful of vaqueros stirring in the gray half-dark. You're up with the birds, Miss Reed, Jericho Flint called, stepping from the barn with a grain bucket in hand. His weathered face held no suspicion, just mild surprise. Thought I'd take a ride, she said, willing her voice steady. See the country. Lita mentioned a fine view from the hills near San Miguel. Jericho rubbed his jaw. Better take one of the hands along. Trails can turn mean if you don't know 'em. I'll be all right, Sable answered. I ride well, I'll stick to the main paths, and I've got Pa's pistol right here. She patted the small revolver tucked in her coat pocket, the one Rufus had pressed on her before she left the east. Jericho eyed her a long second, then shrugged. Suit yourself. Holler if you need anything. 20 minutes later, she was in the saddle on a steady mare named Estrella, heading north on the rutted trade road that linked the ranch to San Miguel. The morning unfolded like a painting. Last week's snow had vanished from the valleys, leaving only white crowns on the highest ridges. The air carried the clean bite of sage and juniper, and far off a hawk screamed as it rode the rising thermals. Sable's heart hammered, half thrill, half terror. What in God's name was she doing, riding out alone to chase a glimpse of an Apache warrior she'd seen for mere seconds through a frosted window? It was reckless. It was scandalous. It was deadly dangerous. And it was the most alive she'd felt since the day she was born. San Miguel wasn't much more than a handful of sun-baked adobe buildings huddled around a dusty plaza and a stone well. Just as Lita had said, Sable crested the last rise as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, washing the whole place in molten gold. And there, by the well, she saw him. Thorn sat easy on his paint horse, talking low with an old Mexican trader who fingered a stack of deer hides. 2 other warriors waited a short distance off, but Thorn stood out like a blade in sunlight. The same proud carriage, the same quiet authority that had stopped her breath on the mountain road. He wore fringed buckskin leggings and a shirt heavy with beadwork, a thick wool blanket thrown over his shoulders against the morning chill. His black hair fell free except for the 2 temple braids, eagle feathers catching the light like dark flames. As if he felt her eyes on him, he lifted his head. Their gazes met across the open plaza, and the same lightning bolt struck Sable again, sharp, electric, undeniable. The world slowed to a crawl, narrowing until only the 2 of them remained. She watched his eyes widen a fraction. Surprise flashing first, then recognition, then something warmer, something that looked dangerously close to joy. He spoke a quick word to the trader, passed the lead rope of his pack horse, and turned his stallion toward her. Thorn turned his paint horse with a subtle shift of weight and guided the stallion toward her at an easy walk. Every upbringing drilled into Sable screamed one thing: wheel the mare around, spur hard, race back to the ranch's safety before it was too late. But her legs refused to move. She could hardly draw a full breath. Thorn reined in a few feet from Estrella. Up close, he struck her even harder than memory had painted him. Features honed sharp as flint, dark eyes burning with quiet intelligence, and something fierce beneath the calm. A faint scar traced his left cheekbone, thin and silvered, only sharpening the rugged beauty of his face instead of spoiling it. For several long heartbeats they simply looked, drinking each other in without a word. Then Thorn spoke, voice deep, carrying the faintest edge of accent, but his English steady and clear. "You came." 2 words, yet they carried a world of surprise, quiet triumph, and an unspoken question hanging between them. "I did," Sable managed, her voice a fragile thread. "Why?" A fair demand. One she wasn't sure she could answer without sounding completely unhinged. "I had to see you again." She swallowed. "I don't know why. I just knew I had to." Something warmed across his face, a softening that smoothed the hard lines, turned sternness into quiet wonder. "I've been looking for you," he confessed. "Asking questions, trying to track where the coach took you after the pass. My friends thought I'd lost my mind." "Maybe we both have," Sable said, a shaky laugh escaping her. "Maybe," Thorn agreed, the corner of his mouth lifting just enough to hint at a smile. "Or maybe we've finally found them." He studied her another long moment, then spoke again. "Come. Ride with me. There's a place I want you to see." It was reckless, forbidden, downright scandalous. "Yes," Sable answered without hesitation. They rode side by side out of San Miguel and into the rising foothills. Thorn led her along narrow, twisting trails that snaked between twisted juniper and towering red rock spires carved by endless wind and rain. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. The silence between them settled easy and right, as though they'd shared trails like this for years, not minutes. At last the path opened onto a small, wind-swept plateau that overlooked a wide sweep of valley. The view stole what little breath Sable had left, mountains rising in every direction, their flanks brushed in burnt orange, rust, and deep violet shadow. A lone hawk drifted lazy circles overhead, and far below the faint rush of a hidden stream carried on the breeze. Thorn swung down first, then stepped close to lift her from the saddle. His hands settled gentle but sure at her waist. She felt the coiled strength in them, power held carefully in check. When her boots touched ground, he didn't step away. They stood near enough that she could feel the heat rolling off his body, could breathe in the scent of sun-warmed leather, wood smoke, and crushed sage that clung to him. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sable. Sable Reed." "Sable," he repeated, saying it slow, tasting each syllable like it was something rare and fine. "It fits you, like sunlight caught in honey." Heat flooded her face. And yours is thorn. Lita told me it means fire. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Lita's a wise woman. She knows when to speak and when to keep quiet. Yes, he went on. I am Thorn, son of Cochise's cousin, leader of my band of free Apache. I've heard you're dangerous, Sable said, trying for lightness even as her voice trembled. I am, he answered gravely, to anyone who threatens my people, but not to you, Sable Reed. Never to you. Why? She whispered. You don't even know me. Don't I? He raised one hand, holding it close to her cheek without touching. When our eyes met on that mountain road, I saw something that told me you mattered, that our paths were meant to cross. He lowered his hand, a faint crease forming between his brows. I know it sounds like madness. No, Sable breathed. It sounds like what I felt too. They stood wrapped in silence, the weight of what they'd just admitted hanging thick and electric between them. Then Thorn stepped back, as though he needed the space to think straight. He moved to a flat boulder overlooking the valley and sat, patting the stone beside him. Tell me about you, he said. Not the polished stories. Tell me about the world you came from. Sable eased onto a nearby rock, grateful for any excuse to break from the intensity of his gaze. I'm from Philadelphia, she began. My father's in business. Steel mills, railroads mostly. My mother organizes charity balls and runs the household. I've got a younger sister, Elowen. She's already married to a banker. I went to a finishing school. I play piano, speak passable French, arrange flowers. She gave a short, bitter laugh. All the things a proper young lady needs to catch a suitable husband. And did you catch one? Thorn asked quietly. Several. Sable met his eyes. I turned down 3 proposals before my father took charge. He sent me out here to watch over some business interests, and to meet Gideon Vale, a lawyer from Boston. He expects us to marry by summer. She saw Thorn's jaw clench, the muscle jumping under the skin. And will you? I don't know, she admitted honestly. Before I came west, I'd have said yes. I'd have talked myself into believing it was the smart move, the responsible one. But now... Her voice trailed away. Now? Thorn prompted, voice low. Now I've seen you, Sable said simply, and everything I thought I wanted has been turned inside out. Thorn went still, staring out across the valley for a long stretch. The only sound was the wind moving through the junipers and the distant cry of the hawk. When Thorn spoke again, his voice came out rough, edged with raw feeling. I've known white women before. Quick nights, bodies meeting for a moment's relief, nothing that ever touched my heart. I figured I had life sorted, guard my people, push back against the soldiers and settlers trying to swallow us whole, hold our land free till my last breath. I never figured on anything like this. He gestured between them, a helpless flick of his hand that said more than words ever could. This, Sable echoed softly. You, Thorn clarified, turning fully to face her. From the second I saw you through that carriage window, hair like sunlight trapped in gold, eyes meeting mine without a trace of fear, I knew. My soul knew yours, Sable. And no duty, no logic, no army or wall the world throws up between us will ever make me unknow it. The stark, unguarded truth in his words hit her like a punch to the chest. No one in her world ever spoke like that. Plain, stripped bare, no pretty verses or careful manners to soften the edges. In Philadelphia, feelings were hinted at, wrapped in silk and etiquette. But Thorn laid truth out like he breathed it. Simple, real, the only way he knew. I'm scared, Sable confessed, voice trembling, of what I'm feeling, of how fast it's happening, of what it all means. So am I, Thorn said, but fear's never kept me from walking straight into what I know is right. He rose and stepped close enough she had to tip her head back to hold his gaze. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, He reached out and brushed a strand of her hair. His fingers moved gentle, almost worshipful, lifting it to the morning light. Then, to her stunned surprise, he leaned in and drew a deep breath, inhaling her scent. "Honey and wildflowers," he murmured. "I thought maybe I'd dreamed it. But no, you carry spring on your skin." The pure intimacy of it sent fire racing through her veins. Without a second thought, Sable lifted her hand and touched his face. Her fingertips followed the hard line of his jaw, rough with a day's growth, then drifted to the high cheekbone and the faint silver scar there. "How'd you get this?" she asked quietly. "Mountain lion," Thorn answered, his voice dropping lower as her touch continued. "I was 15 winters old. She taught me to respect every predator, even the ones that look beaten." Sable's fingers slid into his hair, marveling at the thick, silky weight, so different from anything she'd known. She traced the leather ties of his braids, felt the smooth glide of eagle feathers woven in. "You're beautiful," she whispered, the words slipping out bold and unbidden. "Men aren't beautiful," Thorn said, but amusement warmed his tone. "You are," she insisted. Her hands drifted lower, over the powerful slope of his shoulders, feeling the bunched muscle beneath soft buckskin. His arms were roped with the kind of strength forged by years of hard riding, hard hunting, hard living in unforgiving country. "You're like these mountains, strong, wild, magnificent." Thorn caught her hands in his, stilling them. His eyes had darkened to near black, his chest rising and falling faster now. "Sable," he said, voice gravel rough and strained. "If you keep touching me like that, I won't be able to hold on to my honor. I'll want more." What if I want more too?" The words burst free before she could catch them, shocking her with their daring. For a heartbeat, Thorn looked torn, locked in some fierce inner battle. Then, with a sound halfway between a growl and surrender, he pulled her up and into his arms. The kiss crashed over her like a storm breaking, hungry, desperate, weeks of unspoken longing poured into one fierce moment. His mouth moved on hers with knowing skill, yet there was a tenderness beneath it, something deeper than simple want. Sable had been kissed before, chaste pecks from approved suitors, polite brushes that left her cold. But this was wildfire and thunder, a river smashing through winter ice. Her hands knotted in his shirt as she pushed up on her toes, desperate to close every last inch between them, to melt into him completely. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Thorn pressed his forehead to hers. "This is dangerous," he said quietly. "I know," Sable breathed. "Your people won't stand for it. They'll call you ruined, fallen. They'll say I dragged you down. I don't care." "You should." He eased back just enough to search her eyes. "In their world, I'm nothing, Sable. No money they'd recognize, no land they'd respect, no place in their society. I'm what they call a savage. Choose me, and you choose exile from everything you've ever known." "And if I choose the life they mapped out for me," Sable countered, "I choose exile from my own heart." Thorn's eyes shut for a second, pain flashing across his face. "I ought to send you away. Tell you to ride back to the ranch, marry your proper lawyer, pretend you never met an Apache in the high country." "But you won't," she said with quiet certainty. "No," he admitted, opening his eyes again, "because I'm a selfish man. Because when I look at you, I see everything I never even knew I was missing. Because the thought of you in another man's arms makes me want to set the whole damn world on fire." They stood locked together, the morning sun warming their backs while two worlds slammed into each other, defying every rule ever written or whispered. "What do we do now?" Sable finally asked, voice soft against his chest. "We'll meet again," Thorn said, his voice low and steady. In secret for now, until we figure out a path that doesn't tear your world apart. When? Sable asked, heart pounding. Tomorrow. There's a canyon 5 miles east of your ranch, red rocks rising like a cathedral. Can you find it? She nodded without hesitation. I'll find it. At noon, when the sun sits highest, I'll be waiting. They kissed again, this time slow and deliberate, tasting every second, savoring instead of devouring. Then, with visible reluctance, they pulled apart and mounted up. As they rode back toward San Miguel side by side, Sable's thoughts raced like a stampede. She knew she was stepping onto a trail that could end in ruin. She knew she ought to be terrified, ought to wheel around and bolt for safety while she still had the chance. But when she glanced at Thorn riding beside her, his strong profile sharp against the morning sky, all fear melted away. Only certainty remained. She had found something true, something fierce, something worth every risk. Whatever storms lay ahead, she would face them wide-eyed and heart open. The days that followed melted into a hidden life, shared only by Sable and Thorn. Each morning she fed excuses to Jericho Flint or Maud Sterling, checking distant herds in the east pastures, exploring the canyons, claiming she wanted to sketch the wild views. Then she'd slip away to the secret spots Thorn knew, places where no prying eyes could follow. The Red Rock Canyon became their private sanctuary. Towering walls rose like the ribs of some ancient cathedral, sunlight slipping through cracks to pool in warm golden patches on the stone. At the heart lay a clear spring-fed pool ringed by tall cottonwoods that offered shade and secrecy. On their third meeting there, Thorn finally opened his world to her. They sat side by side at the water's edge, horses grazing nearby, while he spoke quietly. My people call this place the heart of the earth. The old stories say when the spirits shaped the world, this is where they paused to rest and share their dreams. It's beautiful, Sable murmured, trailing her fingers through the cool water. So peaceful. It hasn't always been peaceful, Thorn replied, voice dropping. 20 winters ago, my band camped not far from here. One dawn, soldiers rode in. They claimed we'd stolen cattle. We hadn't. They ordered us to the reservation, to surrender our weapons, to live on worthless dust and poison. His jaw tightened, the memory cutting deep. My father refused. He told them we were free people, that the Creator never made the Apache for cages. What happened? Sable asked, though the pain etched on his face already told her. They shot him down in front of us all. My mother ran to him. They killed her too. I was 10 winters old enough to watch, too young to stop it. Sable's hand found his, squeezing hard. I'm so sorry. I tell you this, Thorn went on, so you'll understand why I can't just walk into the white man's world and play at being civilized. That word, civilized, they slapped it on those soldiers. But there was no civilization in what they did. No honor. Not all white people are like that, Sable said softly. I know. Thorn nodded. I've met good ones. Traders who keep their word, ranchers who respect lines, even soldiers who hate the orders they follow. He turned to her, eyes fierce and searching. And now I know you. You look at me and see a man, not a savage. You hold my hand even when I speak of blood and death. You are a man, Sable said firmly. A good one. What those soldiers did had nothing to do with you or your people. It was their cruelty, their fear. Thorn lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. How'd you get so wise? I'm not wise, Sable answered with a sad smile. If I were, I wouldn't be here. I'd be back at the ranch, planning my wedding to Gideon Vale, stepping into the safe, respectable life everyone laid out for me. Do you regret coming here? Thorn asked quietly. Never, she said instantly. These hours with you, they're the most real thing I've ever known. The parties, the rules, the endless, proper behavior, it all feels like a role I was forced to play. But this... She gestured to the canyon, to him, to the space they shared. This feels like truth. Thorn drew her closer, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. They sat in easy silence, listening to the wind sigh through the cottonwoods and the soft lap of water against stone. "Tell me about your world," he said after a while. "Not the stiff one of your father's business or fancy gatherings. Tell me about you. What did you dream of as a child?" Sable leaned into his warmth, thinking back. "I wanted to be an explorer," she admitted. "I devoured books about far-off places, Africa, India, the Amazon. I dreamed of seeing things no one else had, of stepping into worlds no one from Philadelphia ever touched." She gave a soft laugh. "My mother was horrified. She said young ladies dream of husbands and hearths, not jungles and deserts. And yet here you are," Thorn pointed out, "on the frontier." "That takes real grit," Thorn said, a quiet respect in his voice. "Or maybe plain desperation." "Both, probably," Sable admitted. "Part of me figured leaving Philadelphia would mean leaving all those expectations behind, too. That out here, in this raw, new place, I could finally be different." "You can be," Thorn told her, eyes steady and sure. "With me, you can be exactly who you are. No masks, no pretending." In the days that followed, their stolen meetings grew deeper, richer. They talked for hours about small things and big ones, filling the quiet with words that felt like lifelines. Thorn taught her pieces of his language. "Shiche, my friend. Shia, my son." And after long hesitation, Shah, my heart. Sable shared glimpses of her old world, Philadelphia's grand theaters, quiet libraries stacked with leather-bound books, streets glowing under gas lamps that left him wide-eyed with wonder. "I'd like to see those things one day," Thorn confessed. "Not to live there. I'd wither in a city like a trout pulled from the stream. But to understand where you come from, to know your roots." "And I want to know yours," Sable said fiercely. "Teach me. Show me how you live." So he did. He showed her how to read the land's quiet messages, how birds gathering at dawn meant water nearby, which plants could fill an empty belly, how to cross rough country leaving no trail for enemies to follow. He demonstrated how his people softened hides into leather, shaped tools from bone and stone, and wove meaning into every bead on his shirt. "This pattern here," he said, tracing the design across his chest, "stands for the 4 sacred mountains that guard Apache land." His finger followed jagged lines like lightning strikes. "These mean strength, protection." Sable drank it all in, firing questions that came fast and eager. Thorn answered everyone with endless patience, and, she could tell, real pleasure at her honest curiosity. But it wasn't only words and lessons drawing them closer. A current ran between them, growing stronger with every meeting, harder to ignore. Innocent touches, Thorn steadying her in the saddle, Sable brushing dust from his shoulder, crackled with new meaning. Their kisses deepened, turned urgent, hungry. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks into their secret life, everything shifted. They sat by the pool in the Red Rock Canyon, afternoon sun scattering diamonds across the water. Thorn had been showing her how to braid thin leather strips, something she fumbled badly enough to make them both laugh. "Your hands are too soft," he teased, capturing her fingers in his to guide them again, too used to silk gloves and piano keys. "My hands work just fine," Sable shot back, laughing even as she protested. "You're just a lousy teacher." "Lousy?" Thorn arched a brow. "I'm the best teacher you'll ever have." "You're impossible," she said, grinning. "Stubborn," he countered, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Like a mule, beautiful but stubborn." Did you just call me a mule? Sable demanded, trying for outrage but failing as a smile broke through. A beautiful mule, Thorn clarified, tugging her closer. The most beautiful one I've ever seen. She swatted his chest, and suddenly they were both laughing, tangled in each other's arms. But as the laughter faded, the air changed, thickened with something heavier, deeper. Thorn's hands settled on her waist, her palms flattened against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. Their eyes locked, playfulness burning away, replaced by raw intensity. Sable, he said softly, her name sounding like a vow, like a prayer. Her breath caught. Yes, she whispered. I need to tell you something. His grip tightened, as though afraid she might vanish. These weeks with you, they've changed everything. You've changed everything. You've changed me too, she murmured. No, let me finish. His voice roughened. I've walked 30 winters. I've known war and quiet, hunger and full bellies, loss and survival. But I've never known this. This feeling like my heart only beats when you're close. Like the sun only rises when you smile. Like I'd throw away my pride, my place, my life itself, just to keep you safe and happy. Tears stung Sable's eyes. Sable, Thorn said simply, I love you. I don't know if that's the right word in your tongue. In mine we say Shah, my heart, or Shah Nauni. You have taken my heart. But the truth is the same. You are everything to me, Sable Reed. Everything. Tears spilled over. I love you too, she said, the words terrifying and freeing all at once. I've been fighting it, telling myself it was just fascination, rebellion, anything but this. But I can't pretend anymore. I love you completely, impossibly. Thorn cradled her face in his palms, thumbs brushing away the tears with infinite care. Then stay, he urged, voice thick with need. Don't ride back to the ranch. Don't tie yourself to that lawyer. Stay right here, in this canyon, in these mountains. Be mine. Let me be yours. I want that, Sable said, voice cracking. More than you know. But Thorn, if I vanish, they'll come looking. My father will send riders, maybe soldiers. I can't drag that kind of danger down on your people. I'd face any storm for you, Thorn said fiercely. Any at all. I know. She swallowed hard. But I couldn't live with myself if you got hurt because of me. They stood frozen in that impossible bind, two hearts wide open, yet chained by the brutal facts of their separate worlds. Then what now? Thorn asked at last, voice raw. Sable drew a trembling breath. Give me time. Let me find a way. Maybe I can talk my father into seeing Gideon and I aren't right. Maybe I can carve out a reason to stay in the territory without a wedding ring. I just need a little time to sort it out. Thorn looked ready to argue, ready to sweep her up and ride off that instant. But he must have seen the fear and determination warring in her eyes, because he gave a slow nod. Time, he agreed. But not much. I can't. He broke off, jaw working. I can't keep walking through my days pretending everything's fine when all I want is you. I feel the same, Sable whispered. They kissed then, and this time it was different. No careful exploration, no gentle testing. This was full surrender, a fierce claiming, a silent vow that they belonged to each other now, no matter what the rest of the world decreed. Thorn's fingers slid into her hair, tugging pins free until the strands spilled down her back in a golden wave. He buried his face in it, drawing a long, deep breath. Honey and sunlight, he murmured against her neck. If this is all I ever get, I want to carry every second of it. You'll have more, Sable promised fiercely. We'll find a way. I swear it. His mouth found hers again, deeper this time, more desperate. Sable felt herself dissolving into him, her body answering his in ways that should have shocked her proper upbringing. but instead felt utterly right, utterly inevitable. When his hand slipped beneath the collar of her riding jacket, warm fingers grazing her collarbone, she didn't pull back. When he eased her down onto the soft grass beside the pool, his weight settling over her, she welcomed it, arching up to meet him. "Sable," he rasped against her lips, voice tight with restraint. "If we keep going, there's no turning back. Your people will say you're ruined." "I'm already ruined," she answered, tugging him closer. "I was ruined the moment I saw you on that snowy ridge. My heart was lost to anyone else. So ruin the rest of me too. Make me completely yours." With a sound halfway between a groan and a prayer, Thorn gave in. His hands moved with sure skill, yet aching gentleness, peeling away her clothes layer by layer until she lay bare under the warm afternoon sun. When she reached for his shirt, he helped her, shrugging it off until nothing separated them but skin, sunlight, and the fierce, overwhelming need to be closer. Their lovemaking was tender one moment, fierce the next. Thorn handled her like something sacred and irreplaceable, learning every gasp, every arch of her body with reverent focus. And Sable, who'd been taught that intimacy was a wifely duty performed in the dark, discovered it could be something else entirely. A joyful celebration, a profound connection, a language more honest than any words. Afterward they lay tangled together on the grass, Thorn's buffalo robe draped over them like a blanket. The sun had slid lower, painting the canyon walls in rich orange and crimson. Sable rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady slowing of his heartbeat. "No regrets?" Thorn asked quietly, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. "None," Sable answered honestly. "This is the truest thing I've ever done." "Same for me," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You're mine now, Sable. In the ways of my people, what we've shared makes you my wife. I claim you here, before the Creator and the spirits of these mountains." "And you're mine," she replied, lifting her head to meet his eyes. "I claim you right back. I don't need a preacher, a paper, or a church blessing. This is real. We're real." They kissed again, slow, sweet, sealing their private promise. But even in that perfect, sun-warmed moment, a shadow of worry crept across Sable's heart. They had stepped over a line that could never be walked back across, and though regret never once touched her heart, she would never regret a single second. She knew the fallout would be brutal once the truth broke free. She simply had to find a way to shield Thorn when that storm finally hit. The next morning, reality slammed into her like a cold wind off the peaks. Sable rode back to the ranch to find Gideon Vale's fine bay gelding tied at the hitch rail outside the hacienda. Her stomach dropped hard. She'd dodged him for nearly 2 weeks, sending excuses through Maud Sterling about headaches, fatigue, pressing ranch business. But Gideon had ridden out anyway, unwilling to be put off any longer. "Miss Reed!" Maud's voice cracked like a whip as Sable slipped in through the back door. "Where on earth have you been? You look half wild. Grass in your hair, dress covered in dust. Were you thrown?" "I'm fine," Sable said quickly. "Just took a longer ride than I planned. Let me freshen up." "Mr. Vale has been waiting more than an hour," Maud cut in sharply. "It's downright rude, young lady. He's a busy man and came all this way just to see you." Guilt twisted with a flash of resentment in Sable's chest. Maud was right. It was rude to keep Gideon cooling his heels. But the idea of sitting in the parlor trading empty pleasantries while her skin still tingled with Thorn's touch felt impossible. "Give me 15 minutes, Sable said. "Tell him I was held up checking the far pastures." She hurried to her room, splashed water on her face, changed into a clean dress. Her hair was hopeless, tangled with bits of grass, but she pinned it up as best she could. In the mirror she saw flushed cheeks, lips faintly swollen from kisses. She looked like a woman who'd been thoroughly, joyfully loved. She looked radiant. Drawing a steadying breath, Sable walked to the parlor. Gideon rose as she entered, genuine warmth lighting his face. "Miss Reed, Sable, if I may, I was starting to worry something had happened to you." "I'm sorry for the wait," she said, settling into the chair opposite him. "I got caught up checking cattle in the east pastures and lost track of time." "No need to apologize," Gideon replied graciously. He studied her a moment, then his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right? You seem different." "Different?" Sable's heart skipped. "More alive," he said carefully. "When we first met, you were polite, reserved, but now there's color in your cheeks, a spark in your eyes." He trailed off, flushing slightly. "Forgive me. I don't mean to overstep. I only meant the frontier appears to suit you." "It does," Sable answered, and it wasn't entirely untrue. The frontier, or one fierce man who called it home, suited her more than she could ever explain. Gideon moved smoothly into the reason for his visit. He wanted to show her the house rising on his land and settle on a wedding date. His tone stayed kind, patient, but every word landed like a stone on her chest. "I was thinking, June," he said. "That gives you time to settle in here, and your family could travel west for the ceremony, unless you'd rather go back to Philadelphia for it." Sable's mind spun. June? She couldn't marry him in June. She couldn't marry him at all, but she couldn't blurt out that she'd fallen for an Apache warrior and had no intention of honoring her father's arrangement. "I need more time to think it over," she managed at last. Gideon's smile faded just a touch. "Of course. I don't want to rush you. It's only that your father seemed eager to see this settled, and I thought—" "What my father wants and what I want might not line up," Sable cut in, sharper than she meant. Silence stretched awkward between them. Gideon regarded her with a mix of puzzlement and quiet worry. "Sable, if you're having second thoughts about our arrangement, I'd value your honesty. I'm a practical man, not a cruel one. If you don't want this marriage, better to say it now than drag it out." The gentleness in his voice made the moment sting worse. Gideon Vale was a good man, steady, honorable. He didn't deserve to be kept dangling while she wrestled with how to be with the man she truly loved. "I do have reservations," Sable admitted softly. "Not about you, Thomas. You're exactly what my father promised, accomplished, respectable, kind, but She drew a steadying breath. "I don't love you, and I'm not sure I ever could, not the way a wife should love her husband." Gideon went still for a long beat. "I see," he said finally. "May I ask if there's someone else?" Her silence answered for her. "I see," he repeated, voice quiet. His face was hard to read. Disappointment clear enough, but layered with something that looked almost like relief. "Well," Gideon said quietly, "I appreciate the honesty, even if it's come a little late." He rose, and Sable stood too. "I'll write to your father myself. Tell him the match isn't right. I'll shoulder the blame for calling it off, so you don't have to worry about his anger landing on your shoulders." "Gideon, you don't have to." "It's the decent thing to do," he said firmly. "And despite what you might think, Sable, I want you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me." He started for the door, then paused in the threshold. "One piece of advice, if you'll hear it. Be careful out here. This territory's hard on women who choose paths outside the lines. Whatever or whoever has your heart, make damn sure it's worth the gamble." He walked out before she could answer, his boots echoing down the long adobe hallway. Sable sank back into the chair, thoughts spinning like dust in a windstorm. She ought to feel light, unburdened. One major roadblock had just stepped aside on its own. But Gideon's warning rang in her ears. "Be careful. Make sure it's worth the risk." She closed her eyes and pictured Thorn's hands on her skin, his low voice saying, "I love you." The way her heart finally felt whole, complete, for the first time in her life when she was with him. It was worth every risk. She only prayed the world would see it that way, too. 3 days after Gideon's visit, Sable made up her mind. She couldn't keep splitting herself in two, sneaking off to Thorn while playing at a respectable future. She couldn't keep lying to her own heart about what she truly wanted. She wanted Thorn, wanted whatever life they could carve out together, no matter how rough or uncertain. And she was ready to give up everything else to have it. The plan took shape over sleepless nights. She would leave. Not just the ranch, but the entire polished world she'd been born into. She would ride to Thorn, tell him she was ready to stay for good, and together they'd find a way to live beyond the rules and expectations of either side. It terrified her. It was reckless. It was the most honest choice she'd ever made. On a biting early March morning, Sable rose before dawn. She packed a small saddlebag. Practical clothes, the few pieces of jewelry her mother had given her that could be traded for supplies, and the leather-bound journal Elowen had gifted her years ago. She left a letter for Rufus, struggling to explain the impossible, begging for understanding if not approval. Then, as the first pale light touched the eastern ridges, she rode away from the double L for the last time. The Red Rock Canyon lay silent when she arrived. Thorn wasn't there yet. They weren't due to meet until later, but Sable dismounted and settled in to wait. Her heart hammered with equal parts exhilaration and dread. She was really doing this. An hour crawled by, then another. The sun climbed, warming the stone walls and stirring the birds. Worry began to gnaw at her. Thorn was always early, usually waiting when she rode in. It was nearing noon when hoofbeats finally echoed through the narrow entrance. Sable surged to her feet, smoothing her skirt, words already forming on her tongue. But it wasn't Thorn who rode into view. It was Riven, Thorn's second-in-command, flanked by 2 other warriors. Their faces were grim, set like stone. Sable's stomach plummeted. "Where's Thorn?" she demanded. "Is he hurt?" Riven swung down, expression carefully blank. "He's not hurt, but there's trouble." "Soldiers hit our camp before first light," he said flatly. "They claim a settler's ranch was raided. Cattle run off, a barn torched. They're pointing the finger at us." "Did you do it?" Sable asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," Riven said without hesitation. "We take only what we need to live. We don't make war on families just trying to get by, but soldiers don't care about truth. They want someone to hang blame on." He paused, eyes steady on hers. "Thorn sent me to find you, to tell you he can't meet today. Maybe not for days. He has to keep our people safe." "I'll come with you," Sable said instantly. "To the camp. I can help." "No." Riven's tone was iron. "That would only make it worse. If soldiers found a white woman riding with us, they'd call it proof we're thieves and corruptors. Thorn knows this. That's why he sent me instead of coming himself, to keep you clear of the danger." Sable felt her carefully built plans cracking apart. "But I have to see him. I have to tell him—" "Tell him what?" She spun at the voice. Thorn stood at the canyon mouth, breathing hard like he'd run the last mile, exhaustion and strain carved deep into his face. But he was here. "You were supposed to stay with the people," Riven said, exasperation and affection warring in his tone. "And I was supposed to live my whole life bowing to what other people expect," Thorn answered, eyes locked on Sable. Thorn answered, "I'm finished with that." He brushed past Riven and went straight to Sable, drawing her into his arms with fierce urgency. "When Riven told me he was riding out to warn you off, I couldn't let him go alone. I had to see you, even if only for a minute." Sable pressed her face to his chest, drawing in the familiar scent of leather, smoke, and open sky. "I was going to leave," she said, voice muffled against him. "For good. I was coming to you. I don't care about the ranch, my father's plans, any of it. I just want to be with you." She felt his arms tighten around her like iron bands. "Sable," she said, pulling back to meet his eyes. "I mean it. I've chosen. It's you." A storm of emotions crossed Thorne's face. Joy, fear, love, and a sharp edge of pain. "I love you for that," he said quietly. "More than words can carry. But now isn't the time. With soldiers breathing down our necks and tensions running this high, bringing you into camp would put a target on your back, and on my people. Then what do we do?" Sable asked, desperation cracking her voice. "I can't go back to pretending. I can't." "You won't have to." Thorne cut in gently. He cupped her face, dark eyes burning into hers. "But you do need to hold on a little longer. Let me deal with the soldiers. Let me prove we had no hand in that raid. Once the dust settles, we'll find our way." "Promise me," Sable said, gripping his wrists hard. "Promise you'll come back to me." "I promise," Thorne said, voice rough with conviction. "On my life, on my honor, on everything sacred, I will come back. Nothing will keep me from you, Sable. Not soldiers, not duty, not even death." They kissed then, desperate, hungry, as if they could imprint each other into memory through touch alone. When they finally parted, tears glistened on both their cheeks. "I have to go," Thorne said gruffly. "If I stay another second, I won't be able to leave." "Be safe," Sable whispered. "Please, please be safe." "Always," he vowed. He traced her cheekbone one last time with his thumb, then turned and strode back to where Riven waited with the horses. Sable watched them ride out, each hoofbeat cracking her heart a little more. She stood alone in the canyon until the sound died away, leaving only the wind whispering through the rocks and the distant cry of hawks. Then she mounted Estrella and turned back toward the ranch, even though every fiber of her being screamed to wheel around and follow Thorne. Consequences be damned. The next 2 weeks dragged like a slow bleed. Sable moved through ranch days like a shadow, tending chores, forcing smiles, while her mind stayed locked in the mountains, replaying every moment, wondering if Thorne was safe, if he'd cleared his people's name. Lita saw the change. One evening in the kitchen, as Sable sat watching the older woman shape tortillas, Lita spoke quietly without looking up. "He's all right, your Apache." Sable's head jerked up. "What? How do you—" "I've got friends who trade with his band." Lita kept working the dough. Word came. Thorne met with the soldiers and the fort commander. Brought proof his people were 50 miles away when the raid went down. Mexican traders who saw them. Witnesses who swore to it. The commander's satisfied. Restrictions are lifting soon. Relief crashed over Sable so hard the room tilted. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for telling me." Lita finally met her eyes, knowing, gentle. "You love him." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Sable said simply. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone." "And he loves you," Lita went on. "That's plain. But love by itself isn't always enough, señorita. The world can be cruel to those who break its rules." "I know," Sable said. "But what else can I do? I can't stop loving him. It'd be like trying to stop breathing." Lita sighed. "Then be strong. Both of you. Love will carry you through a lot, but it won't shield you from everything. You'll need courage, patience, and a heap of luck." "I'll take whatever comes," Sable answered. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Sable sat at the small desk in her room and opened the journal she'd kept since meeting Thorne. She wrote of their first meeting on the snowy pass, of learning his name, of how he made her feel truly seen for the first time. She wrote of fear, the gut-twisting terror of losing him, of forces beyond their control tearing them apart, of wondering if love, no matter how fierce, could ever bridge the chasm between their worlds. But she also wrote of hope. Because despite it all, she believed in what they shared. She believed two souls that recognized each other so completely, that fit together so perfectly, were meant to find a way. The only question was whether the world would allow it. 5 days later, Sable was in the stable, brushing Estrella's coat and trying not to count the endless hours since she'd last seen Thorn, when a commotion rose from the yard. "Señorita!" Miguel, one of the young vaqueros, appeared in the doorway, face flushed with excitement or alarm. Miguel's face was flushed, eyes wide. "Señorita, there's someone here to see you. An Apache." Sable's heart slammed against her ribs. She dropped the brush mid-stroke and ran. But when she burst into the yard, it wasn't Thorn waiting. Riven sat his horse, speaking in low tones with Jericho Flint. Both men turned as she approached. "Miss Reed," Jericho said carefully, voice cautious. "This man says he's got a message for you, from the Apache called Thorn." Her pulse roared in her ears. "What message?" Riven's face stayed stone blank. "Thorn says come to the Red Canyon at sunset. He'll be waiting." That was all. It was everything. "I'll be there," Sable said. Jericho frowned. "Miss Reed, I don't think—" "I'll be there," she repeated, firm as iron. Then to Riven, "Thank you for bringing the word." The warrior gave a single nod, swung up, and rode out without another syllable. The ride to the canyon felt endless. Sable pushed Estrella harder than wise, but even so the sun was just kissing the western rim when she arrived. Everything bathed in molten gold and deep crimson. And there he stood. Thorn waited beside the pool, Paint Horse grazing nearby. He wore his finest, buckskin leggings and shirt heavy with intricate beadwork, eagle feathers woven into his hair, an elk-hide blanket draped across his shoulders. He looked every inch what he was, a chief, a leader, a man of quiet power and unshakable dignity. But when his eyes found her, the formal mask cracked. A smile broke across his face, rare, real, transforming everything. "You came," he said as she dismounted. "Did you doubt I would?" Sable asked, walking straight to him. "Never," his voice softened. "Still, seeing you now, it's like the sun breaking through after a long winter." They came together hard, arms locking tight. Sable felt weeks of coiled tension finally start to loosen, melting away in his hold. "The trouble with the soldiers?" she asked against his chest. "Settled," Thorn confirmed. "We proved we had no part in the raid. The commander was fair, fairer than most bluecoats. He even said sorry for the trouble." "Thank God," Sable breathed. Thorn eased back just enough to look at her. "I've been thinking these past weeks, about us, about what we want, about what's possible." He took her hands in his. "I can't give you the life you grew up expecting, Sable. No big house, no wealth by white standards. Life with me would be rough. We'd follow the seasons, live simple, face danger from folks who hate what we are." "I don't care about any of that," Sable cut in. "Let me finish," Thorn said gently. "I can't give you those things, but I can give you this." He pressed her hands to his chest. "My heart, completely and forever. My protection, always. A life that's honest, free, lived on our own terms." His voice dropped softer. "And, if the Creator blesses us, a family, children who'd grow up between two worlds, but loved fierce by both parents." Tears spilled hot down Sable's cheeks. "That's all I want," she whispered. "You're all I want." "Then stay with me," Thorn said. "Not just today or tomorrow, always. Be my wife in the ways of my people. And if you need it, we'll do it your way too. Ceremony, whatever it takes. Let me build a life with you." "Yes," Sable answered without a heartbeat's pause. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Thorn let out a breath that carried relief and wonder in equal measure. He pulled her close and kissed her, deep, thorough, tasting of promises and forever. When they parted, he reached into the pouch at his belt and drew something out. I made this for you, he said, opening his hand. It was beautiful, a leather cord strung with beads in sky blue, pure white, and warm gold, a turquoise pendant carved into a bird with spread wings. The blue is for your eyes, Thorn explained as he fastened it around her neck. The white for your spirit, pure and brave, the gold for your hair, catching light like trapped sunshine, and the bird is for freedom, because with me, you'll always be free to be exactly who you are. Sable touched the pendant, throat too tight for words, tears blurring her vision. And I have something for you, she managed at last. From her pocket she drew a small cloth-wrapped bundle. It's not as fine as yours, but... She unwrapped it to reveal a gold pocket watch, her grandfather's, one of the few personal things she'd carried west. I want you to have this, Sable said. Not because you need a white man's timepiece, but because it's been in my family 3 generations. It stands for where I came from. And I want you to have it, so you know I'm giving you all of me. Past, present, and future, Thorn said softly, accepting the watch with careful hands. He studied the engraved case, thumb brushing the worn gold. I'll treasure this, he murmured, and I'll treasure you, Sable, every single day I draw breath. They talked deep into the night, voices low, plans unfolding like a map drawn in starlight. Thorn explained his band would soon head up to the high summer grounds, sheltered valleys with cold, clear streams, game thick in the timber, far from wagon trails and army patrols. We could make a home there, he said, a cabin with walls and a roof if you want the feel of your old life, or a wickiup that's quick to raise and easy to move. Either way, it'll be ours. I don't care what it looks like, Sable answered, as long as we're together. There'll be hard days, Thorn warned. Some of my people will eye you with suspicion at first. They've got good reason to distrust whites. You'll have to show them, prove you honor our ways. I will, she promised. I'll learn everything. I'll work harder than anyone. You'll just be you, Thorn cut in gently. That'll be enough. They'll see what I see. A good heart, real courage, honesty. In time, they'll welcome you. And my people? Sable asked quietly. My family? Thorn fell silent a moment. You should write to them. Tell them you're safe. Tell them you chose this life of your own free will. Whether they accept it or not, that's on them. But they deserve to know you're alive and well. My father will be furious, Sable said. He'll probably cut me off for good. Will that break you? Thorn asked. She thought it over, honestly. It'll hurt. I love my parents, despite everything. And my sister too. But no, it won't break me, because I finally understand what counts. It's not their approval. It's this. Finding where I belong, the person I was always meant to find. You belong with me, Thorn said simply. I know, Sable answered. I think I knew it the instant our eyes met on that snowy pass. My soul knew yours. The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of change. Sable said goodbye to the ranch and the life she'd been raised for, a mix of sorrow and relief washing over her. Jericho Flint stared in stunned silence when she told him. Maud Sterling was scandalized, sputtering about propriety and ruin. Only Lita seemed unsurprised. I knew the first time you asked about him, Lita said, as she helped Sable pack her few belongings. The way his name came out of your mouth, like a quiet prayer. I don't know how to thank you, Sable said, for everything you told me, and everything you didn't. Thank me by being happy, Lita replied, and by staying true to yourself. Too many women never get the chance. Sable wrote long letters to her family, trying to explain the unexplainable, hoping someday they might forgive her, even if they never understood. Then, on a warm, late April morning, she rode away from the Double L for the last time. Thorn waited at the property line, mounted on his paint horse, a spare mount saddled for her things. "Ready?" he asked. Sable glanced back at the hacienda one final time. Everything she'd been taught to prize was there. Security, standing, her father's blessing. But everything she truly needed stood right in front of her, hand extended. "I'm ready," she said, taking his hand. They rode together into the mountains, toward the summer grounds where Thorn's people were already setting up camp. Sable had no idea what lay ahead, what hardships they'd face, how they'd bridge two worlds that so often clashed like thunderheads. But she knew one thing with rock-solid certainty. She had found home. Not a place, but a man. And that was more than enough. The Apache camp lay tucked in a high mountain valley that stole Sable's breath. Crystal streams wound through meadows thick with wildflowers. Tall ponderosa pines rose overhead, their bark giving off a warm vanilla scent in the sun. Far off, snow-capped peaks stood watch like silent sentinels. As they rode in, Sable felt dozens of eyes turn her way. Women paused, hands still on hides they scraped, corn they ground, fires they tended. Men stopped sharpening blades or working horses to watch her pass. Children stared openly, many seeing a white woman up close for the first time. The scrutiny was heavy, unflinching, but Sable kept her chin up. She'd known it wouldn't be easy. Thorn led her to a wickiup set a little apart from the others, not cut off, but given breathing room. "This is ours," he said, helping her down. "For now. When you're ready, we can build something more permanent." "It's perfect," Sable said honestly. The rounded frame, covered in hides and brush, looked warm and sturdy. In the weeks that followed, Sable threw herself into learning the ways of Thorn's people. She worked alongside the women, though her first tries at tasks they'd mastered as girls were clumsy and slow. She scraped hides until her palms bled raw. She memorized which plants could feed or heal. She helped cook over open campfires and taught herself to weave tight baskets from willow and yucca. At first, the women kept their distance. Quiet glances, few words, watching her fumble tasks they'd known since girlhood with looks that could have been judgment or plain curiosity. But slowly, as they saw her keep going without a single complaint, treating their work with real respect, their wariness thawed. An old woman named Vesper took Sable under her wing. She taught her Apache words, chuckling patiently when the pronunciation came out wrong. She showed her the right way to butcher venison, which herbs sharpened the stew and healed the body. "You learn fast for a white woman," Vesper said one day, eyes twinkling like she'd just told the best joke. "I'm a woman in love," Sable answered in halting Apache. "That makes everything easier." Vesper laughed outright, a rich, warm sound. "That's the truth. Thorn's a good man, strong leader. We worried he'd never find a woman who could stand beside him. Our girls are too smart to take on such a serious one." She sobered. "Your road won't be easy. Some here will never open to you. But most of us, we see your heart. That counts more than the color of your skin." The men proved harder. A few ignored her completely. Others watched with open distrust, waiting for her to slip up, to prove she was a spy or a weak link in their defenses. But Thorn's steady faith in her, and the obvious joy she brought him, gradually chipped away even at the hardest skeptics. Riven became an unexpected friend. He'd started cautious around her, but her stubborn determination to make this work earned his respect. "You surprised me," he told her one night by the communal fire. "I figured you'd run back to your own kind after a week of our life. It's hard, especially for someone raised soft. I was raised soft, Sable agreed. But I'm tougher than I look, and I'm not going anywhere. This is home now. These are my people now. Even when it's rough? Riven pressed. Even when some talk against you? Even when you miss the easy comforts you grew up with? Even then, Sable said firmly. Because Thorn is here, and where he is, that's where I belong. Riven studied her a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Then you're truly one of us, Yellowhair. Welcome. As summer swelled into full bloom, Sable realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for weeks. The bone-deep tiredness, the waves of nausea, the way certain smells turned her stomach. But she waited to be sure before telling Thorn. It was Vesper who confirmed it one morning when Sable couldn't keep breakfast down. The old woman studied her with knowing eyes. I thought so, she said with quiet satisfaction. You carry a child. I see it in your face, the way you move. 2 moons, maybe 3. Joy and terror hit Sable at once. A baby. She was going to have Thorn's child. Don't be scared, Vesper said kindly, reading her expression. This is good medicine. A child born of 2 worlds, a bridge between peoples, a gift, not a curse. That evening, Sable led Thorn away from camp to their favorite meadow high above the valley. The sunset painted the sky in blazing orange and deep purple. The air smelled of pine and sage. I've got something to tell you, Sable said, heart pounding. Thorn turned to her instantly, alert. What is it? Are you sick? No, she said quickly. I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm carrying your child. For a heartbeat, Thorn just stared. Then his face lit up. Joy, wonder, awe flooding every line. You're sure? Vesper confirmed it this morning, Sable said. We're going to have a baby, Thorn, late winter or early spring. Thorn let out a whoop of pure happiness and swept her into his arms, spinning her until she was laughing and dizzy. When he set her down, tears shone in his eyes. A child, he said, voice thick with wonder. Our child. Sable, I've got no words. Are you happy? She asked, though she could see it written all over him. Happy? Thorn laughed, the sound rich and free. I'm beyond happy. I'm blessed. The Creator has given me everything. A woman I love more than my own life, and now a child to carry our love on. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Thank you, he said softly, for this gift, for choosing me, for staying, for giving me a family. We're giving it to each other, Sable corrected, covering his hand with hers. This child is ours. They held each other as the sun dipped behind the peaks and the first stars blinked awake in the deepening sky. Sable felt a calm settle over her deeper than anything she'd ever known. Pure rightness, true belonging, home at last. Whatever storms waited ahead, and she knew they'd come thick and heavy, they'd meet them side by side, and now they'd face them as a family. The last months of her pregnancy rolled by in unexpected quiet. As winter closed in, the camp drifted to lower ground, settling in a sheltered valley where snow wouldn't bury them deep. Thorn built them a small cabin, adobe walls, and a solid door blended with traditional touches. Best of both worlds, he said, showing it to her proudly. Just like our child will be. Sable's belly grew round and heavy until she could barely glimpse her own feet. The Apache women, who'd fully embraced her by then, fussed over her constantly. Vesper brewed soothing teas for the aches. Younger women brought the softest hides for her to rest on. Even the men who'd once watched her with suspicion now treated her with gentle protectiveness. They see the child, Thorn explained when she mentioned the change. To our people, children are sacred. The future, the hope our way of life keeps breathing. carrying my child makes you sacred too." In late February, a big snowstorm blanketed the valley in white. Labor came hard and long. First births usually did. Vesper and 2 other skilled women stayed with her inside the cabin, while Thorn paced outside, wearing a deep path in the fresh snow despite the biting cold. As dawn cracked the sky and the storm finally eased, a baby's strong cry cut through the stillness. Vesper stepped out, face glowing. "A son," she announced. "Lungs like a warrior, good color, mother and baby both strong." Thorn nearly bowled her over, rushing inside. Sable lay propped against soft furs, worn out but shining, cradling a tiny bundle. "Meet your son," she whispered as he knelt beside them. The baby was perfect. A shock of black hair, skin a beautiful warm blend of both parents. When Thorn touched one impossibly small hand, the little fingers curled tight around his father's much bigger one. "He's strong," Thorn said, voice thick. "What do we name him?" They'd talked names for months, never quite settling. Sable wanted to honor Thorn's heritage. Thorn wanted to honor the courage it took for Sable to walk away from everything she knew. "Ashki," Sable said at last, the Apache word for boy, but also young warrior. "And Alexander for his second name, when we need the white way, after my grandfather." "Ashki Alexander," Thorn repeated softly. "Son of 2 worlds, may he carry the best of both." He bent to kiss the baby's forehead, then Sable's lips. "Thank you," he whispered, "for this miracle, for everything." The years that followed weren't easy. Skirmishes flared with soldiers who couldn't tell peaceful bands from hostile ones. Winters came hard, food sometimes scarce. Whites and some Apache traditionalists alike frowned on their union. But joy ran deeper than the hardships. Ashki grew into a bright, fearless boy, speaking English and Apache with equal ease, riding almost before he walked well, carrying his father's quiet leadership even as a toddler. 3 years after Ashki's birth, Sable delivered twin girls, Celine and Briar, different as day and night, but loved beyond measure. The cabin grew to hold the family, extra rooms added with care. Rufus and her mother never fully forgave her choice, though stiff letters eventually arrived. Elowen, now divorced and living in Boston, understood better. She even visited once, eyes wide at Sable's simple, joyful life. "I never would have believed it," Elowen said, watching Sable and Thorn work side by side while the children played nearby. "But you're really happy." "I am," Sable answered. "More than I ever was, or could have been, back in Philadelphia." The territory kept changing around them, railroads snaking west, towns sprouting, pressure mounting on Apache lands. But Thorn steered them through it with steady wisdom, keeping peace with nearby ranchers while refusing to move to the reservation. "We've shown we can live beside settlers without blood," he told anyone who'd listen. "We raise crops, we trade, we hurt no one. This land's been ours for generations. We're not leaving." Slowly, grudgingly, their corner of New Mexico came to accept it. Thorn's band wasn't fully Apache by old ways, nor fully folded into white society. But it was something new, something that worked. On a warm spring evening more than 5 years after that first snowy glance on the mountain road, Sable sat outside their cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in fire. Thorn stepped out after settling the children for sleep and eased down beside her. "They're finally out," Thorn said, slipping his arm around her shoulders as he settled beside her. Though Ashki begged for 3 more stories, and the twins kept giggling instead of closing their eyes, Sable leaned into his warmth, content in a way that felt bone deep. "Remember when I was terrified I'd made the worst mistake of my life," she said softly. "Those first days here, everything so strange, so hard. I felt lost." "I remember," Thorn replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "You cried for a week straight even though you tried to hide the tears. You didn't hide them very well. Sable laughed quietly. No, I guess I didn't. But I understood, he said. You gave up your whole world for me. Grieving that was only natural. I don't grieve it anymore, Sable told him. Sometimes I wonder what my days would have looked like if I'd married Gideon Vale. Tea parties in Santa Fe, church socials, a tidy life, maybe children, maybe contentment. Thorn waited, letting her find the words. But I wouldn't have been alive, she finished simply. Not truly. Not the way I am now. This life. With you, with our kids, with the people we've built a place among, it's the realest thing I've ever known. Every hardship, every fight we've pushed through, it's all been worth it. Because at the end of every single day, I'm with you, and that makes everything else bearable. Thorn stayed quiet a moment, his fingers finding hers and weaving them together. Do you remember what I told you that day in the Red Canyon? He asked. When I first said I loved you, that your soul knew mine. Sable smiled. And I told you you'd hunt me to the ends of the earth if I ran. I remember, Thorn said. You did run, didn't you? That morning after we first came together, you were so scared you bolted back to the ranch. I did, she admitted. And you nearly lost your mind thinking I was gone for good. But I came back. You chose me again and again, Thorn said, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. Just like you chose me, Sable replied. You faced soldiers, suspicion, threats to your leadership, all because you wouldn't let me go. They sat in easy silence, watching the sky shift from gold to deep purple to velvet blue. From inside the cabin came a small cry, one of the twins murmuring in her sleep. Then quiet again. Any regrets? Thorn asked softly. Sable turned to him. This man who'd turned her world upside down, who'd seen her in ways no one else ever had, who'd given her a life richer than she'd ever dreamed possible. Not a single one, she said firmly. You? Thorn's smile broke slow and rare, lighting his usually serious face. My only regret is I didn't stop that carriage sooner on the mountain road. Should have looked through the window weeks earlier. Sable laughed, the sound soft in the evening air. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to, she said, not a second too soon or too late. That's wisdom, Thorn agreed. He pulled her closer, and they sat together as night wrapped their valley, their home, their life. Inside, the children slept soundly. Ashki with his father's thoughtful expression even in dreams, Celine and Briar curled together like puppies. 3 beautiful souls born of 2 worlds, 3 living bridges across cultures that had clashed for generations. Outside, their parents kept quiet watch. 2 people who'd defied every rule, every expectation, to build something solid, something enduring, something true. The future was never certain. It never had been. But Sable and Thorn had proven that real love, deep, soul-shaking, life-changing love, could overcome the tallest walls. She had fled the untamed Apache chief, whose spirit she'd set ablaze. He had hunted her until his last breath, or rather, until he'd caught her and made her his forever. And together they'd won more than either could have imagined. They'd won each other. They'd won a family. They'd won a life carved out on their own terms, free, fierce, overflowing with love. And that, Sable thought, as she rested in Thorn's arms beneath the endless New Mexico stars, was the greatest triumph of all. The end. Dear listener, pause right now and look at yourself. You're still here. And that, right there, is extraordinary. Maybe no one's reminded you today, or this week, or even this month just how far you've come. But we see it. We see your resilient spirit, even when your body's worn thin. We see the quiet bravery of someone who's weathered storms inside and out, and still chooses to get up every morning. You carry the same iron strength that carried Sable through her darkest doubts, and the same steady light that kept Thorn standing tall when the world tried to break him. But above everything else, you are one of a kind. So many didn't make it this far. So many lost their way. So many couldn't carry the weight anymore. But you're still here, breathing, fighting, living. That is noble. That is beautiful. That is magnificent. The world tries hard to dim lights like yours, but your flame still burns. Quiet, steady, even when no one's watching. And that's why tonight, before you close your eyes, let this wrap around you stronger than any blanket. You are rare. A warrior, a survivor, a sacred spark of stubborn hope in hard times. You haven't failed. You're not behind. You're living proof that simply keeping on is already a victory. And if tomorrow brings cold winds, remember, the fire inside you has already outlasted fiercer winters. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal/disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure, but every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.